Feed in any comments that you've got, so we know. And we're already seeing people coming on board. I can see we've got Gusharan has come from London. We've got more coming in. But it comes in. It takes a couple of minutes for people to come in on LinkedIn. It's the way LinkedIn works. It takes a couple of minutes. But we've got. I think we're going to have an absolute crackerjack of a session today. We're going to be talking. Well, obviously, with Julia Onslow-Cole here, we're going to be talking about President Trump's proclamation, and we're going to be talking about the impact of that on our industry in some great detail. We've got Michelle Durkin, who's just joined Benevo, who's working as my wonderful producer and is there helping us out with the polling and research we've been doing. And Michelle's going to be on the call. And we've also got, certainly not least, we've got the wonderful Dave Bencivengo, who's the president of Weichert Workforce Mobility. We're really honored to have him on the show. And we're going to be talking to Dave. Again, obviously this discussion about the proclamation is going to be very important, but we're going to be talking to Dave about what's been going on in managing the COVID crisis from a Weichert perspective. But also we're going to be talking about mergers and acquisitions in the industry. And obviously Weichert has been involved in acquisitions in the past, and we've had many acquisitions of other companies in the last couple of years, some of which of course didn't lead to fruition. And we're going to be getting into all that detail. Just to tell you a couple of other stuff, other points before we finally get started is, let me just tell you about next week's guest. I know it's crazy to talk about next week's guest before we've even done this week's, but next week, I'm delighted to say, again, we're honored. We've got the CEO of Air Inc., Steve Brink, and the America's lead of Air Inc., Morgan Crosby. So we've got a wonderful show for you next week. Let's just give some shout outs. Let's see, we tend to get people from all over the world coming here. We've got people I'm seeing from Houston, from Connecticut, from London, from New Delhi, from St. Louis, from Jacksonville, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, more from San Francisco. We're getting a lot from San Francisco, and it's early for you guys. We really appreciate it. That's actually why we moved it. We started off being an hour earlier. We moved it an hour later so that you didn't have to join us in your pajamas. But anyway, so we're getting more from San Francisco, which is great. We've got people from Bucharest, Romania. Someone said from their sunny back garden. That's not that helpful in terms of knowing where you are, but California, from Atlanta, from Boston, from Memphis. We've got from New York, from White Plains, Syracuse. We've got people coming in from all over the world. So it's going to be a great show. And let me just actually start bringing in our guests so you can see who we got on the show. I'm delighted to say we've got, where are you? We've got Dave Bencivengo. So, hey, Dave.
Hey, everyone.
Good to see you on the show.
Good to see you. Thanks, Brian.
And where are you today?
I'm in New Jersey, right here in the States.
And how's the weather out there? It's scorching here in London.
It's actually quite nice here. A little hot, but we'll take it.
Okay, that's wonderful. And we've got one of your neighbors. We've got another, somebody else from New Jersey. We've got Michelle Durkin. Hey, Michelle.
Hi.
Hey, good to have you on the show, and welcome to the Benevo family.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, back again this week, and obviously excited to be part of the Benevo family. And
we had you on the show last week, and we got a lot of love out there. I think you clearly, a lot of people sort of think highly of you, and more shout outs. Give us shout outs. If you're friends of, or Dave or Michelle, please do, give them a shout out, say hi. We're trying to create this family feeling on this show. And talking of family, this lady, Julia, feels like part of my family. I see you once a week on this show, Julia. It's great to have you back. And I suspect you've got lots of really big stuff to be talking to us about this week. Yeah, I mean, the big news is obviously the presidential proclamation, and we're going to be going into that. But there's other stuff we're going to be talking about too, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But it's just great to have such an amazing panel here. We've already got nearly 200 people on the show live. It's great. The the love we're getting from everybody. And if you do enjoy the show, please do use the icons, write the comments or do the thumbs up or the heart or the clapping hand. If you hear something you like, let us know what you think. And also ask questions. I mean, we are here for you and especially today, they're going to be some interesting questions. I know you're going to want to ask Julia on immigration issues, and especially, but not only the proclamation, but also Dave. We've got the president of one of the major relocation management companies. It's not every day you get direct face-to-face with the president of a company as significant in our industry as Weichert. So ask the questions. Feel free to ask easy questions or tough questions. If they're too tough questions, we'll dodge them. If they're easy, we'll deal with them. But don't be embarrassed. You ask us the questions you want. A little bit of Benevo news before we get started. And that is, and I mentioned it last week, but I just wanted to sort of mention it again, is that we've launched something new, which we think is a radical game changer for the industry. We've launched what we're calling $1 disbursements. So if you've got a lump sum program, allowances, reimbursements, you've got suppliers to pay, we undertake, using our technology, we will pay them for you for a flat fee of $1 per disbursement. And in fact, if you're a Benevo client, we'll do it for free. So anyway, so it's an interesting development for the industry. But let's move on. What I'd like to do now is to move on to the immigration side. And Julia, I know there's been so much going on, but you're going to surprise us, I know, because although everybody wants to hear about the presidential proclamation, that's not where you're starting. You've got another bit of exciting news to share with us. So why don't you talk us through what's going on with remote workers?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to say a shout out to Christine Sullivan, who's the director of our European practice. And she works closely with European Commission and other European governments. And she pinged me this email the night before last saying that Estonia is the first government in the world to allow a digital nomad visa from the 1st of July. So they've altered their immigration laws, and you can then go to Estonia benefiting from, low cost of living, high-tech environment, and you can work there and stay there for up to a year. You get Schengen travel rights, and basically you can be freelance or work for a foreign employer. So it's really so innovative, and it really shows how the landscape's changing to fit all the things that we've been talking about for the last few weeks.
So do you think we're going to see more remote worker visas? Do you think other countries might follow that trend?
Definitely. I think it's the start of a really big trend. It's a bit like air bubbles, So a few weeks ago, we never knew what they were, but definitely a new trend.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've got two counter trends. On the one hand, we've got the US trend of actually trying to protect jobs and make it harder to come to the country. On the other hand, we've got the Estonia trend and maybe other European countries trying to make it easier to come into the country because you're working overseas. So we're seeing completely different politics coming up. But but anyway, let's move on. I think you also wanted to talk a little bit about China and Singapore. Is that right?
Yes, there's a couple of things I wanted to say. So very quick, but on China, we know that there's been this big spike. Quite a few extra cases. We talked about it last week. They're now up to about 250 in Beijing. But I just wanted to point out that because of this, if you're moving people from Beijing to Shanghai or any other cities, they have to quarantine for 14 days. And I really wanted to emphasize that because a lot of people do commute and go back for meetings. So you need to be very careful. And the second thing is that because of this incident, there's also been a lot stricter requirements on the travel bubbles. So if, for example, you're using the travel bubble between Singapore and Beijing, you've got to apply for the re-entry visa, you've got to register individually with the Foreign Affairs Office, you've got to provide your itinerary, like a dot-to-dot itinerary, and you cannot use the subway or buses. So I think that it's really, really important to bear in mind. The travel ban in China and elsewhere in Asia Pac is not going to come down very soon. Certainly China's won't. But we are seeing it being much easier to get the normal re-entry visas that we've been talking about over the past few weeks. So in essence, if you want to move someone to China, you really can, but you have to be really careful about all of the processes. And then just finally on Singapore, we have seen quite a lot of compliance issues, but that's not just Singapore, it's actually a global thing. So as we remobilize, please everyone be really careful about compliance. People are very interested about how compliant companies are being, whether you're doing all the right things about advertising vacancies. Lots of countries have quite high unemployment. And we're seeing this similar pattern across Asia, particularly in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, where we have all the restrictions lifted inside the country, although encouraging people to work from home, but outside there's the travel ban, but more relaxation on the kind of exceptions and the pre-entry approvals.
Okay, and I've got a funny feeling we're now going to go on to the United States.
Yes.
I don't know, just to let everybody know out there, this is very exciting. We've just hit 280 people on the show. That is actually an all-time record for this show. So clearly it is Michelle being there, it's Dave being there, it's Julia being there, and maybe the presidential proclamation has helped a little bit. But we take all the love, and we love you guys all back. So anyway, let's talk about the United States. And I know we're going to get loads of questions about this too. This is such a big subject. Yeah.
So I want to say straight away, I'm not a qualified US attorney, and I'm really grateful to Bo Cooper, Parisa, Carl Kemp, and all the wonderful people at Fragments for having all the calls and all the briefings. But I will, try and convey all of their messages and insights as best I can. So you'll recall that on the 22nd of April, there was the first proclamation, and we talked about it with Brian. And we explained that would have limited effect on businesses, because that first proclamation barred some foreign citizens from moving to the US on new green card applications. And we said that really a lot of those green card applications are done inside the US. And also, anyway, a lot of the consulates were shut. So we concluded that it had limited impact at the time. But the thing that we really focused on was the fact that we knew there was going to be this second proclamation, and that was going to focus on temporary visas, particularly H1s, Ls, the sorts of things that lots of companies use. So that announcement came on Monday night, and the proclamation talks very much about the need to get US citizens work. And it says that, as a result of the proclamation, it's going to free up about 525,000 jobs. But the key thing to remember is that the proclamation are for those who are outside the US and who do not have a valid visa. And it was also, in addition, it's extending the existing restrictions that were there before on the new green card applications. So it came into effect at 1 minute past midnight yesterday. So from today, it's in effect. And this focus is on people outside. So what it does, it says that these people, which I'm going to describe in a second, these foreign citizens are prevented from moving to the US on a number of temporary visa types until the end of the year, which is really effectively 1st Jan next year. And these include H1Bs, which are the highly skilled workers, H2Bs, which are the guest workers, Js, which are interns, trainees, and au pairs are included. We heard lots of information that they wouldn't be, but they are. And then L, the intercompany transferee visas, and the spouses.
Okay, so that's absolutely fascinating, and I've got loads and loads of questions. But before I do, let me just bring in you, Michelle. You've been doing some research into what our industry is thinking about this. Can you just talk through some of the research we've been doing, and we'll get people to take part in it too live?
Sure, Brian. So earlier in the week, I posed the question out in the LinkedIn world, asking how will the U.S. presidential proclamation impact global mobility? I will share the answers in a little bit, but for now, for those of you that didn't have a chance to answer the survey, if you would go ahead and share your thoughts and comments in the chat box, that would be great. It's been a few days, and I hear from some of my colleagues in the mobility space, and there's work, there's extra work having to be done, and sort of scrambling and figuring out what's going to happen. The options, and I'll read the options for the poll in case folks didn't see them. One choice was the proclamation is a disaster for our industry. The other choice was it's a blip, don't worry about it. And the third choice was it's the right decision to save jobs. So those were the three options to the polling question. For me, personally, I think it was a little bit of a hasty decision, but that's just my vote. So.
And where are you, Dave? I mean, do you think it was a disaster, or do you think it's a blip, or do you think it's the right decision? Yeah,
I think I'm not sure it's a disaster yet. I think it's a very aggressive move and probably a little bit of an overreach. We have to remember we're in an election cycle here in the U.S. this year too. So there is a lot of things that are happening that are sometimes more poll and research driven than policy driven. So I think there are some realities that with that combined with COVID and everything else that we're dealing with economically. So I think it's certainly not good for our business. And even beyond that, socially, I think we need mobility more now than ever. We need more different perspectives spread around the world. We need more opportunity for understanding and chances for people to work together in a more direct way. So while I would expect in the short term, because we really are trapped in a limited travel scenario and things that are already on hold for other reasons, we probably won't see an instant impact as great as we will in the short term. And then lastly, I just think it's hard for our clients and businesses in general to have to plan their year around this constant change, especially when they're trying to build business plans around COVID as it already exists.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I suppose there's nothing like hitting an industry when it's down. We've had the worst year in probably living memory, worst couple of months anyway in living memory in terms of the complete shutdown, and then to do this and to sort of stop all the L1s and H1Bs etc. From outside the US, I think is difficult. But I mean, interesting point was raised by Jeremy Chander. So shout out to you, Jeremy. And he asked this, and then we'll get more into the detail again in a moment. But I'd be interested in the panel's view on this. He said, "What are your thoughts on the H1B and L1 bans until December? And now the New York Times is saying that US citizens might be refused entry into Europe. I mean, do you think we might get retaliation from Europe to say, well, actually, if we can't go to the US, you can't come here? Are we going to have a race to the bottom?"
I don't think that's retaliation at all. I think it's purely done on epidemiology, and I think that the EU are reacting to the fact that their views on the statistics and what's happening make the US go on that list. I don't think it's linked to the ban.
But sorry, that's a link not letting people into the country? That's not a ban on visas.
No, it's basically saying, basically the EU is drawing up a list of those people, of those countries which they feel from 1st July are safe to come in, and those citizens which would need an additional layer of approval to come in. And the US has been put on that list, but I think it's purely for epidemiology reasons, nothing to do with not wanting to have US citizens in Europe. But on a wider note, obviously, there will be, on a wider note, that is generally what happens if there are a lot of restrictions in one country. But I don't think the EU example is a result of that.
Okay, well, I'll feed in some comments as we keep going through, but let me just get back to what you were saying, Julia, maybe just drill down a bit. You've talked about there being the ban. There must be some exemptions or exceptions. Can you just talk us through those, perhaps?
Yes.
Give us some good news. Whatever there might be.
Well, I mean, a lot of things are quite unclear at the moment and are going to be unclear for a few weeks. But, there is a question mark over whether or not Canadians are exempt because they don't need visas. So actually looking at the wording of the proclamation, you'd think that Canadians were exempt. Obviously, there's exemptions for people in the food supply, for anything to do with the research like COVID-19. And also for businesses, a really important exemption of foreign nationals who are doing something necessary for the economic recovery of the US. And I think that this is very interesting, and I've heard lots of commentators talk about this. But I think I just would add a note of caution that it's really got to be a very good case, and it may be a junior person if they're critical to the economic recovery, but the wording of this exemption is quite narrow, and obviously it's a very serious offence if you make representations that are not absolutely accurate. So I think that's one area to look at. And as I keep saying, it's for people who are outside of the US. So if, for example, you had an L and you wanted to extend it inside the US, you could do that. But I think the thing that is more worrying is that the proclamation directs the immigration agencies to develop further regulations, and really it lays a pathway for further changes. And I really agree with what Dave said about in itself, it might be a kind of containable thing, but it's, what changes will these other regulations bring? And, we had heard a lot about, before this proclamation came out, that, President Trump was calling for massive changes to their H-1B system, wanting to perhaps even eliminate the lottery and award the $85,000 to those on a higher salary. And to look again at things like prevailing wage, and so within the proclamation it says that within 30 days and every 60 days the DHS and DOL can recommend these changes. So it's all very new. There's many questions that are unanswered. The port officers haven't had their instructions yet, and it's only in about 4 weeks that we're really going to have some cases. But there is this difference between the language of the proclamation and the speculation beforehand. And I think,
there was quite a lot of gossip beforehand, wasn't there?
Yes.
So can you tell us what the gossip was, if you can share, and where you think that, where we ended up compared to the gossip? Because that's stuff that we can't read in the normal way.
Yes. So I think it's this kind of area is the area that we should be, alert for, and remain expectant. So we were consistently expecting that maybe there'll be some actions on H4s, which are the spouses of the H-1Bs, so that they have their right to employment curtailed, that there will be really huge government fees on H-1Bs, that maybe students on STEM degrees wouldn't be able to work for 2 years, but it might be reduced to 12 months. We were also seeing that maybe there might be a new requirement if you were at H-1B and you were sent to work on a client's site, that there will be immigration obligations on both the receiving company and the sending. And so, the question, the broader question really, is this proclamation a segue into broader changes? And I think, that's the big question. And I think that, whilst we're looking at that, and we'll talk over the next few weeks about how it's all playing out, it's really important for companies not to just look narrowly at the impact of the proclamation from their own perspective, but very much look if they use managed services or consulting services, what that means to them.
Okay, thank you. So let's find out. We did the poll, and I was, whilst you were talking, I was sort of putting up some of the comments that people made. But Michelle, maybe you just talk to us about what the findings of the research were.
Sure. So it was sort of split. Again, the question was, how will the presidential proclamation impact global mobility? 42% of respondents said it's a disaster for our industry. 53% said it's just a blip, don't worry about it. And just 5% said it was the right decision to save jobs. So majority of folks said, a blip, don't worry. And then close second, it's a disaster.
Okay, so Dave, let's bring you into the conversation. I mean, obviously, you head up a major player in our industry. How have you been affected? I'm not thinking particularly about the proclamation, but over the last 3 months, I mean, it must have been it must have been dreadful. I mean, what's it been like on the ground running in our RMC? Just tell us. I mean, we'll get onto some of the good news and the silver lining in a bit, but tell us a bit about some of the challenges you've been facing at Weichert over the last three to 4 months.
Yeah. Well, the famous saying in our industry, right, is that no 2 days are ever the same, but this is really a whole new realm. Like most companies, we have work, of course, in Asia Pacific. So this really began for us back in the onset, where we were monitoring and supporting our offices in that region and watching as things unfolded. And of course, as it started to broaden and came to the U.S. and obviously has become a really deep challenge here, we were forced to react on a number of levels. So I break down our response in several categories. It was really around clients, customers, supply chain, and internal. So the natural first order was to focus toward supporting health and safety, and that was happening inside of our clients. So one of the things that I think we were immediately mobilized around was the idea of using our strong consulting resources and able to conduct a number of spot surveys, quick benchmarking. We set up a resource site, things that would hopefully help our clients with some of the initial questions that they were asking. And I think in working with our clients, there was a great deal of reality that this was uncharted territory for everyone. There's really no playbook for this per se. So in that regard, I think that we spent a lot of time and effort early on supporting that. On the customer side, of course, health and safety was critical. So it was really important that we, both from a day-to-day and counseling perspective, exercised tremendous creativity. I think our teams did a wonderful job. They amazed me literally every day with creative solutions that they were applying to help people move and or stay put, and how that could work, or stay in temporary living that they were supposed to leave, a myriad of scenarios. And then, of course, as we started to look at our supply chain, making sure that there was good plans, good practices, good operating procedures to react to containment and also resiliency in the supply chain that we have to ensure is there. And then turning to us, I think as an employer, of course, and having colleagues around the world, we also applied a lot of those same practices and rigor around planning and practices to ensure safety. We watched the business decline. Clearly, there's been a significant turn down. We were having what was set to probably be our best year ever, and that was quickly altered with the events. So we've seen declines in our volumes in the range of 55% through the April-May period, and recently those declines have lessened. So we're operating closer to about a 35% decline through June. And reorienting the business around that, of course, has required a number of steps that include everything from again, being very creative about how we manage the workforce and how we partner with our clients, but also, instituting things like furloughs, which we opted to do as a major practice versus minor, with the intent that by doing that, we could protect the majority of jobs. And also, and I'm proud of the way everyone reacted to that. There was really a sense of solidarity and the sense that people recognized the reality of what was happening inside the company, and at the same time, playing a part in it.
What proportion of you, at the lowest point, what proportion of your workforce was furloughed?
Yeah, so within our mobility company, we furloughed hours from everyone, and in doing that, we were able to significantly reduce the need to have job eliminations. So it was a strategy whereby we had, the choice of doing, deep cuts and eliminating jobs. And in some cases, of course, you have the implications of health insurance, which we certainly didn't want to do. And then at the same time, looking at it, we were able to, avoid as much of that as possible. We obviously had to do some reductions, and we had some unpaid leave, but we were able to blunt a lot of that activity by doing the company-wide furlough.
And are you beginning to come back to, I won't say normal, but are you beginning to come back to near normal?
We are. So we've reduced the furlough, and then we're looking to take actions further this month as we finish up this month, and then hopefully we'll relieve much of that.
Okay, that's great. And if there's questions out there for Dave or indeed for Julia, then keep the questions coming in, and we'll try and answer. We're going to try and keep a balance between dealing with the proclamation and the rest of the industry as well. But just in terms of the industry as a whole, Michelle, I think you've been doing some research in terms of levels of business.
Yes. There was another, excuse me, there was another question posed out there in LinkedIn world. The question was, when will we return to pre-2019 annual move volumes? The options were in 2021, 2022, 2023, or not till 2024 at the earliest. The overwhelming response was in 2022, with 60% of people responding. People thought we would resume 2019 volumes in 30% said 2021, 6% said 2023, and just 4% said not until 2024 at the earliest. So it seems like most people are thinking, next year we'll still be on the lighter side, and we'll tick back up to normal volumes in 2022.
Okay, and Dave, do you think the audience is being optimistic or pessimistic or realistic, or where are you? When do you think we'll get back to a 2019 level of volumes?
Yeah, I actually do agree with that. I think 2022 is, certainly on the outside of where we may be heading. Right now, there's just tremendous uncertainty. So as we look at how businesses are reacting, you asked about furloughs. I think that's been a large practice of many companies in the broader business sense, whereby that gives flexibility for companies to return people and also to improve the economy overall. So overall, I would expect that next year is a real wild card because of the simple fact that COVID is such an unknown. I think it's all based on vaccine. The thing that I would say, and that gives me hope for 2021, is that there is a steady positive stream about vaccine potential that may be as recent as or as soon as the end of this year into early next year. I think the end of this year may be ambitious, but not as a medical expert, but just from what I read. When we have really noted and independent researchers and scientists suggesting that is possible, I think it's really positive to think that 2021, just on optimism and the potential of comeback for the business, could return us within the next year.
Okay, let me feed in some of the comments that we've had from people in LinkedIn, and there's some questions in here as well. The comments are both on the proclamation and on your words, Dave, in terms of the way you've handled the crisis. But here we go. Melania and Ivana Trump are both immigrants. Any irony there? So that's from Tom Brune. Or Rob Zeitz, great point. Uncertainty might be the biggest long-term impact of this. And again, I think someone's picking up on the Melania and Ivana point. The strength of the US is based on 250 years of embracing immigration. So I think we're getting that. And then in terms of the comments that you made, Dave, I mean, here's a comment. Thank you for an honest, no-nonsense talk, Dave Bencivengo. So yeah, I mean, I think people really do appreciate when a leader of an organization is straight talking and honest and, and just saying it as it is. So, so all credit to you, Dave, for saying that. And here's a question for you. It's when it just says LinkedIn user, it's not because the person necessarily doesn't want to tell us who they are. It's because their LinkedIn settings, their privacy settings are set that it only shows their name within LinkedIn and not elsewhere. So it doesn't come through to the platform we use. But somebody who's anonymous for the moment said, how quickly did you make the decision and execute? And I think that one's aimed at you, Dave.
Yeah, as it relates to reorienting the workforce. Absolutely. Yeah, look, I think,
Oh, actually, I can tell you who asked that question, because it is there on LinkedIn World. It was my good friend Yuki Watanabe from The Gap, who in fact has been a guest on the show and is based out in the Bay Area. So I don't know whether you know Yuki, but anyway, that's her question. How quickly did you make a decision and execute?
Yeah. So I have to say that we're a fairly decisive company. We tend to make decisions. We do a lot of planning, and we execute, as a priority. Having said that, we really took our time. We wanted to see what was going to happen. We obviously have an enterprise that includes, other pieces of business, real estate and mortgage and title and, different elements that we were watching across our enterprise to see what types of impact. So, I would say we probably initiated furlough activity and other things probably after our competition based on all that we knew. And I think in part that's why the idea of a broad furlough was embraced by our colleague base, because they realized that we had taken our time and really didn't look to do something until we were well through March and into April, and recognizing that at that point volumes were continuing to decline significantly. So we gave, I think, the opportunity for us to get the work in motion as settled as possible, knowing that the work behind it was going to be much less, and do it in a methodical way that didn't create a lot of disruption for our clients either, because again, we were primarily reducing hours versus altering our staff. Again, some decisions had to be made beyond that, of course, because it was just relevant to the situation, but the vast majority of it was dealt through furloughed hours.
Okay, and again, more comments. The love from people. Appreciate the transparency. Important to understand how the industry is managing the crisis. Thank you. So again, I think just coming on the show and telling people as it is, I think is a question for you though, Dave, from Priyambada. Would the peak season this year be in July or later? If later, when do you think it will be? So when do you think your peak season will be? Great question, Priyambada.
It's not only the great question, it's the ultimate question, I think, facing the industry right now. Is there a summer? Is there a delayed summer? We're seeing, like I said, good signs of a material reduction in the decline, which is positive for June. I think as we get into July, we're going to really see if that trend sustains, and if we can get back to levels that were closer to normal. That would suggest that April, May normal volumes have now shown up in July, August. So for us, I think our best modeling and forecasting suggests that as we complete this month and as we look into early July, we'll see hopefully that late July, mid-July, and into August probably present the best opportunity for what might be our traditional, closer to our traditional summer.
Okay, and out there in LinkedIn land, if you want to ask a question of Dave or Julia, do ask it. If you've asked the question earlier, say more than 5 minutes before, and I haven't addressed it, can you ask it again? Because the way this thing scrolls up, we've had, believe it or not, I think we've had over 400 comments. And so some of the earlier questions that people might have asked, I'm afraid, are just too far up my feed, and I won't necessarily know them. So if there's a question we haven't asked and you want to get it asked again, then please do feel through. Here's another question for you, Dave, and this is from Ron Labin. We've focused on the RMC impact. What are we hearing about the health of the global supply chain?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that was one of the things that we looked into, early on, and we actually have a practice where we do a supply chain health assessment process. We've had that in place for several years, probably close to 10 years now. And we actually use that to maintain, even under normal circumstances, a sense of where our supply chain is, in particular our key suppliers, in terms of financial health. And obviously we monitor and manage performance throughout the year. I think that, clearly smaller businesses, as you think about the broad spectrum of the thousands of participants in the supply chain, are going to be impacted in different ways. The material declines are going to have more of an effect on perhaps smaller businesses, but in some cases it depends on just how well those businesses are run and how sustained the situation is. So we haven't had any, fortunately, and I think to the great credit of the supply chain in this industry, we haven't had any particular challenges in our supply chain directly. We haven't had any financial failures. We've not seen any significant degradation in service. Of course, there have been some adjustments. We've gotten calls that team members had changed or actions were taken that affected the supply chain. But overall, I wouldn't I would say that we've seen a lot of resiliency so far. And the hope is that if, to the earlier question, summer is delayed, that would be really important to the success, I believe, of the supply chain.
Okay, and I mean, again, another question for you. This is from Mark O'Reilly. Question for you, Dave. Given the virus situation in some Latin American countries is worsening, are you seeing a pause by companies on moves into that region with increases to areas where containment is much further along the curve? I suppose more people going to New Zealand or somewhere, or Australia, and less to, say, Brazil.
Yeah, we are seeing companies in discussion are advising or reorienting their initiation activity toward other options or holding, which clearly, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about remote life at some point, but those changes are affecting the decisions that companies are making. And look, I think even back to the initial conversation, if you talk about the U.S. immigration policy now, this is not the safest place to show up in, right? Statistically speaking. So, the natural tendency even of activity to flow into the U.S. despite the curtailment may not be as extreme, just because of companies don't want their employees coming into the U.S. right now under certain circumstances or into certain locations or states. So I do think that trend will continue as people have a vote in this, right? It's not just the company's discretion as to whether to send someone somewhere. There is a vote that families get in that matter, and I think many of them have voted for safety in some cases, which has altered that. We've had one client who repatriated a number of their people out of a country because of COVID, only to determine that where they went back to was less safe, and then they wanted to return back and to where they came. From where they came. And so, we're seeing those types of things happen for sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're getting so many comments. This is from Patricia Tavares, who again has been a guest on the show. And Patricia is based out in Brazil. And she said, unfortunately, the LATAM situation is really not the best. A reduction is being seen immediately, but hopefully it will revert soon. So that's from Patricia. Other comments coming in here. This is from Mary Roberts. How does the current environment affect previous 2020 business plans, such as RFP bids or client policy reviews? I mean, actually, if I can just say, I think every company I ever dealt with in the last couple of years had their Vision 2020. They all came out with, I suppose because 2020 is such a great phrase for, eyesight and what have you, everybody came out with their Vision 2020. I think it's fair to say that every single company in the world got it wrong. And every business plan that anybody wrote for 2020 has been thrown in the trash can, or maybe shredded before it gets too embarrassing. But I think a point that Mary makes there, which I think is a fascinating one, is RFP bids. There must have been some that were in the pipeline. Have they been put on hold, or have you been still going through bids, even though the volumes might not be there? And when you come to price it, how are you pricing it when you might have been pricing it previously based on high volumes, and for all you know, volumes might be tiny the next year or thereafter?
Yeah, I've actually been surprised at the amount of RFP activity that is still going on. There was definitely examples where clients placed things on hold. We saw companies defer, this if it wasn't a critical priority, or it was an exercise that was based on timing versus need, or, problems with an incumbent, for example. So in that regard, we saw that certainly in March and April. I think we've seen a lot of release go forward, and we're excited by the prospect of that. I think people are getting back to business. I know we're doing the same around our 2020 plan. There's no question everybody got it wrong. I think that's an understatement. But at the same time, there is a need to have planning, and there's a need to look forward and know that this is, to me, I've often talked to our team, and I'll just say that this can't be our forever. So it's easy to lose ourselves in this moment, but history will probably look back at this time as a moment. And I hope that's the case. So it's important that we keep our eyes moving forward, and I think that's what many businesses are doing, where they look at RFP activity as something they need to continue to look at. As to the pricing question, It's hard. I think one of the things that we're very focused on is sectors right now. We know that there are companies that are either growth-oriented companies or may do extremely well because of the current circumstances. We want to make sure that, we acknowledge that because we know their businesses could expand tremendously. We also know that other businesses may not be able to realize, 2019 levels when we are pricing it. So it really is, I think, a partnership approach to just asking honest questions and understanding their plan for what type of mobility they really expect. And then, doing the best we can. I also think it's a great time for volume tiering and to come back into pricing. That's really been pushed out quite a bit where, the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about if certain tiers are achieved, then this is what the pricing would be. I think this is an ideal time for those types of, practical conversations.
Okay, and another question that's come through, again, this one's for, this is for you, Dave. You're a popular man at the moment, and for some reason it's not coming on my screen. Let's get it on the screen. And that's from, I'll read it out. I'm not sure it's come up for some reason. It's from Steve Burson from Relocation. And Steve, I think, is based in Malaysia, although I know he's a long-term Japan hand as well. And he said, borders are not opening anytime soon, especially for regular citizens. How do you see things for international mobility? We have initiations, and that's out in Asia, but a very reduced ability to provide service. I can see many cancellations coming through. Is that a concern?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's an astute observation because as we look at our business, we have really a roller coaster of activity that's in production, and moves that are on hold. We know that there is a portion of that activity that will cancel. Those decisions perhaps haven't been made. I think that some of that's going to bump up against financial and fiscal years as companies start to look at relocation and over time recognize that perhaps a move that was planned isn't going to happen, or things will happen in maybe in the lives of the intended assignee or transferee, so they could be altered. But I think that we're stuck in a lot of ways. We've seen that in our forwarding business for sure. You can only go where you can go. You can only deliver where you can deliver. And we're being patient and working through those as things do open up, and hopefully will continue to open up. But I think the thing that's most pressing is where does the spike of coronavirus continue, and to what extent, and is it feasible and possible to go back to the closures and the strict guidelines? Are people going to be okay with that is a real question. I think as a matter of policy and practice, it's been dictated, but I also think now that people have started to emerge, it's going to be harder to put that, genie back in the bottle a little bit.
That moves me on to another subject, and I think actually I might open this up to the rest of the panel too. I mean, the question from Kay Hall, another person who's been a guest on the show in the past. By the way, if anybody would like to be a guest on the show, we are actually relatively booked up for the next few weeks. But if you'd like to be on the show, and you're in a senior level position, either with an RMC or in we'd actually like to get some more people on from the corporate world, do send a LinkedIn message to either me or to, more importantly, to Michelle, who's putting together our speaker list, and we'll see if we can get you on the show. But the question from Kay is this: is Weichert making any permanent changes to their business model or scope of services? And actually, I could ask the same question to you, Julia, of Fragerman, and Michelle, in terms of what you've seen in the industry too. Do you think we're going to see permanent changes coming through? So maybe we'll start off as it's addressed to you, Dave. Do you think there's going to be any permanent changes to the way in which you work?
Yeah, I look, as a company, I was thinking about remote is the most obvious one that comes to mind. We've always been a company that's embraced remote work. So prior to COVID and probably 7-8 years before that, we've always had 2 days of work from home available to our colleagues by their choice. And, we've used that strategy around the world to, try to appeal to some work-life balance and help people to manage, their personal situation. For all the other things that remote work brings, it's not bad to wear a T-shirt on, a Thursday and just, relax in your home office a little bit and sort of work, but work differently. So, this change for us really introduced, change, but not to the drastic nature as if we were a company that didn't have that practice. So it allowed us to go fully remote very, very quickly. We had, tested that strategy. We've been prepared for, broader usage of that strategy. So, I think our remote workforce will grow as a result of the fact that until the COVID situation is truly resolved, we'll have additional remote work even after return to offices. And beyond that, I would expect that this experience will open doors to the fact that work can be done differently. We've lived it and known it as part of our practice, but we have about 15% of our workforce that is permanently remote, just by design and by hiring and people who've transferred to locations and remain with the company and so on. But I would expect that will grow a bit as the model is shown to be effective and can work. I think there are some downsides, and we can certainly address those that you want to, to the extent you want to talk about remote work. But there's no doubt that the model can work because it is working.
Michelle, I mean, you've been in global mobility for 25 years or so, which means you must have started about the age of 7. But I mean, you've been in the industry for a long time. With big companies like Honeywell and Teva and other, but now you've joined our family at Bencivengo, and we're all about technology and digital destinations. Do you see that as a change, that ways in which people work? Do you think technology is going to come into it a lot more?
Absolutely. I think we've seen it happening right before our eyes, over the course of the last few months. I don't know about you and people on the phone, but I'd never heard of Zoom until, just a few months ago. And Google Hangouts and all of these other, technology platforms that have brought us all together. So I think for sure, technology has and, has forever changed the way we work. I think, in addition to what Dave was saying in terms of just being remote, I think travel, everyday business travel we'll see go down. People that used to, get on a plane for a day or an overnight trip for a meeting, for an hour meeting, may not happen face to face anymore. So I think there's going to be a big shift in the everyday business travel. Of course, there are certain things that have to happen face to face and are better to happen face to face, but I do think we'll see a decline. And in terms of global mobility, I think one thing is for sure, I think policies will forever be changed. Companies that didn't have, things in place to deal with global pandemics will now be revised and rewritten to address them.
I think also scope of services, that was the other part of Kay's question. I think they will change. I mean, I think, for example, we've had lots of discussions over the week where everyone has been agreeing that their role has become different, more strategic, and that, that the whole idea is to really push down the transactional work, use more technology, and then really work on strategy, because strategy is really needed more. And I've seen, at Fragaman, we're doing a huge amount on our tech, but really so we can concentrate all the lawyers on the strategic help. And I think that, that's where clients, really need us. They need that seamless running of the transactions underpinned by the technology, but then they need all the might of the, global lawyers to really think of really good strategies to support global mobility professionals to take to their board, to think of new innovative ways to sort of get around all the quarantine rules, compliantly, and compliance being a big issue. So I think, as we've discussed over the last week, people's roles are changing, and then the scope of the services that you deliver will be very different.
I want to end up on a final subject, we normally end at an hour. I'm going to run this show slightly longer because I think we've had so much, such a great conversation, such big issues to discuss today. But I just want to talk about the future of global mobility. It's not every day I get, the president of a major company, or, well, having said that, we've had a few on, and hopefully we'll have a few more. But
it's done pretty well.
It's such an honour having you on the show, Dave. And one of the things that, even if we put COVID to one side and just go back to, the old days of 2019, we were seeing pressures happening in the RMC industry. And to my mind, there was pressure coming from 3 or 4 different directions. First of all, there was a pressure on pricing because procurement were getting tougher. The market was very competitive. So there's a downward pressure on pricing, or maybe if not downward in real terms of pressure on pricing. At the same time, we were seeing an upward pressure on cost because, the economies were booming, salaries were rising, and indeed technology was becoming, people were expecting more and more for technology, and technology is always expensive to develop. And then the third leg of this was that volumes were going down of traditional assignments. I mean, volumes of overall moves were going up, but traditional assignments were going down, and those were the big ones for our sector. So you had this squeeze, and as a result of it, we had a whole bunch of mergers. You guys at Weichert, you acquired the MI Group. We had the Sterling Lexicon deal. We had BGS was acquired by Relo Group. Server was acquired by private equity. There was quite a lot going on in terms of consolidation of our sector. And then, of course, we had the merger that never was, the Server Cartus deal that was obviously, all set to go through, and then coronavirus struck, and probably we won't say too much about that one because it's all being handled, in delicate stages, I'm sure, at the moment. But the question that I suppose I was thinking is, what next? And I know, Michelle, you've been doing a little bit of research on this. Maybe you could just talk us through that.
I sure did. So the third polling that happened this week was exactly around that. The question was, how many mergers or acquisitions in the RMC space do we think we'll see in the next 12 months? The options were none, 1 or 2, or 3 or 4. Overwhelming number of respondents said they saw that there would be 1 or 2 at 57%. 35% of the people thought there would be 3 or 4, and just 8% thought that there would be none. We did realize that maybe the question was a little bit misleading, because if you have 1 or 2, is it 1 and 2 merging or 1 or 2 separate things? So, but anyway, that was the question, and the feedback, like I said, at 57%, respondents thought 1 or 2 would happen. So I don't know, Dave, where that falls in with your line of thinking.
Yeah, or to put it another way, only 8% said that there won't be a merger next year.
Right.
They all thought there would be some merger. And again, out there in LinkedIn world, do let us know what you think. But Dave, what's your view? I mean, you've obviously been through a merger. I don't know how many years ago it was now. Is it 3 or 4 years ago?
2.
Oh, right.
Yeah, okay. Which is a little over 2 years. Yeah, look, it's it's an industry, to all of the points that you made, Brian, that are absolutely factual in why the pressures in the industry are what they are. And one of the things that has been a consistent theme, even with COVID, has been trends that were happening will only accelerate. If people were buying more on Amazon, they're going to buy even more now. They've gotten, had to, things like grocery pickup and online activity will change forever. Some things. I think this industry is very similar, and a lot of it just comes down to investment and the things that you cited around compliance and investments in technology, data privacy and security. Those are not, passing costs. They are significant upfront initial investments, and then significant ongoing investments that companies need to make, and not just to compete and to be good at what they do, but also because they have to meet compliance standards of very significant Fortune 1000 type companies who have a lot of rigor and a lot of expectations, and understandably so, around these areas. So I think as companies have had to adjust their business models to compete, to address those questions, to even answer those questions in an RFP, let alone deliver upon them, is a very different environment than we've had just a few short years ago. I think each company has a different acquisition strategy or philosophy. Ours has always been around, we look at acquisitions very strategically. It's not just about gaining market share. It's often about diversifying the company. So if you look back at some of the ones that we've done, whether it was an expansion of assignment management, tax and compensation services, years ago with PwC and the U.S. practice, or if it was, getting into the government business with Allegiance, or it was looking at, something like freight forwarding with the MI group. We've always looked at it as a way to make the company better and different, and buttress ourselves a little bit for times like this, where we can participate in different streams. For example, right now our government business is very much on track and actually ahead of last year. So our U.S. government business remains resilient. So I would expect that companies will also look at what complements their business and what may help them. I also would expect that like all industries, there are different owners and entities that will decide that it's an appropriate time to move forward. And maybe last year might have been the watercrest of the best time to do that, and now those plans may be delayed a little bit. But I think we're going to know a lot more about your ultimate question in the next 60 to 90 days, as far as if that process starts to accelerate, because if that summer that we talked about doesn't really appear, I think it will put a lot of pressure on businesses to start to make some decisions, where it may be in their best interest to look for suitors or for companies to see opportunity to merge.
So what I'm hearing, reading between the lines here, is you're not ruling out, if the right opportunity came along, making another acquisition, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, Weichert's been, since the day I joined the company 16 years ago, we've always talked about acquisition as a strategy. It sits on our business plan virtually every year. And we look at it as a means to make the company better and gain more tools and assets and quite honestly, talent. One of the things that is certainly hard in this industry to acquire is talent on a piecemeal basis. So being able to make acquisitions brings people of great quality and experience into our company, and brings us a better chance of success. So yeah, Weichert will always be open to acquisition and growth if it makes sense.
Yeah, and a question that's come through is from Gasharan. Again, privacy settings don't, for some reason, it shows up on LinkedIn, but it doesn't show up here for some reason. But Gasharan has said, will we see more RMC mergers and eventually get to a point where we will have a super RMC top tier? I mean, most industries do tend to consolidate down to a group of 4 or 5 major players. You get it in the banking sector, you get it in the legal sector. You do get that. I mean, actually, I suppose Fragment's unusual in its sector in that it's so dominant, it's got such a big market share, and number 2 is a long way behind in terms of size. But normally you get 3 or 4 companies of a similar size. And you were in a situation where sometime last year you were going to be faced with a gorilla when the Servicatus deal came, and you're going to have this major player facing you. What was your reaction at the time? Did you look at that and think, oh gosh, that's really good news, they're merging, that's one less competitor out the marketplace? Or did you look at it and say, that's really bad news, there's this gorilla walking down my block?
Yeah, I would say that I'll venture a guess that pretty much every competitor in the industry looked at that as an opportunity to have one less competitor in the industry, right? Just one less competitor in an RFP, one less sales professional calling on their client or competing in a bid. So from our perspective, sure, we saw that as a good thing. The nature of those 2 companies being so large already, to us meant that large is large, and use the term gorilla. They would certainly go from each in their own right, from gorilla to silverback, if you will, because it was going to be a different level of size and scale, but still big, and still, I think in some ways operating as the biggest of companies. For us, we're always interested in what's our value proposition, what do we have what's our voice, what's our point of view to offer to clients, and that's never going to be based on being the biggest. It's we've built I think a really effective scale so that we can deliver and compete and provide services broadly and do everything that we think our clients and prospects will need, and we can grow with them as they grow. So for us, I'm not sure that we'll ever get to a cadre of sort of 4 providers or a similar size category. There is the potential certainly of a merger like that picking up again. despite, the present situation, whether it's with different players and partners or it's, completely different companies coming together. But I think it's a pretty unique situation considering the ones that were in discussion because size was just so vast. And, for us, it's, we're focused on, being good at what we do. And I think size has value, but it's certainly not the greatest value.
Okay, I think we're actually pretty much out of time. It's been a fascinating afternoon. I'm sure that in terms of the proclamation, there's going to be loads more coming out of it. I suspect, there'll be more changes or alterations as the rubber meets the road for good or for bad. And indeed, as I think the point you made, Dave, this is also, political with November elections in mind, and who knows what will happen, post November in January if there's a new administration, where we'll be, or not, and nobody knows. But it's fascinating. We're going to be back next week. Dave, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
And you've been really open and transparent, and people have just loved that. I'm seeing all the loves and clapping coming up on my LinkedIn feed from people. So that's been absolutely great. So Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to participate, and wonderful the content of what you've created here and what you've been doing. So I think on behalf of the industry, we all appreciate it.
Well, not at all. It's a blast. And Michelle, thank you for coming on board and for your help with all the polling and the research, and for your input from your 25 years of knowledge of the industry. We will be back next week. We've got another session next week. Our special guests are Steve Brink and Morgan Crosby, both from Air Inc. So we've got the CEO and the Americas lead for Air Inc. And we're going to be talking, I'm sure, all the issues of the week and whatever else takes your fancy. So we're back next week. Thank you all to everybody in the audience. And as I said, we're back next week. So goodbye, everybody. And thank you again to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.